everybody in the audience, this is not me asking questions and the panelists answering, but the way we like it and the reason we keep it this intimate is if at any point you feel like you want us to stop and you want to kind of join the conversations, please do. Any questions you have, there are no rules, so we're happy to stop and have a conversation about what you want to talk about. So we have Lamudi representatives all around the room, so a show of hands and we'll stop the conversation. Yeah? Okay, perfect. So we start with one basic question. I think around the world, majority of people have accepted what's happening. I think a lot of us, the biggest problem is we don't know how we can contribute. A lot of people don't know whether, I mean, there's always conversation around, you know, what's an individual going to do? At the end of the day, it's institutions and, you know, the large players in the market that are going to bring about change. So maybe we start today with a quick summary of where you think we stand and why you think this conversation is becoming so much more important today. And then we could maybe dive down a little bit into the NGOs and the private sector and the role that they have to play at large. Yeah? So we could start maybe with a water perspective. Manila had a water crisis very recently, and I think all of us stopped at Lamudi. I remember we kind of put across a question. We said, how many of you have felt the climate change? How many of you think it's actually impacted you at an individual level? And it also came to our notice that a lot of people did not even connect the water shortage or anything with the changing environment, right? They couldn't make that connect. So I'd love to hear your perspective on this and how you kind of define it for yourself.
Thank you, Pravna. Pravna found me through LinkedIn. I'm here. I updated my LinkedIn because I just left Manila Water last August, and that probably triggered for her to find me. But I'm a believer of sustainability even as a private citizen. So I'm here, taking my former hat. Climate change is real. We have felt that in Manila Water. We actually took the brunt of the shortage, even if we have been warning for many, many years. At the core of the issue is we have a 50-year-old dam called Angat Dam. It was built during the time of President Macapagal. So that's how long ago it was. And Metro Manila has been dependent on Angat for the last 90s, for 96% of its requirements. So we're dependent on one dam. We have not built a second dam for sustainability. So when the rain started missing Angat last year, end of last year, because of climate change, then it affected the whole system. Angat supply the other dam called the Mesa. So when they all went down, we all had a foretaste of what it could be last summer. What we have experienced last summer is just a sample of how difficult it could be if we do not prepare. So at the heart of that is the rains have come in very late this year. It did not rain the usual in Q4 last year. So, and you can't blame the weather forecaster Pag-asa. It has become very difficult to forecast rains. Now they're talking about hot Christmas. No? So I think the only point to start the discussion is climate change is real. It has affected the water industry. It will affect us all. And we really need to pull our heads together because it's a very real issue and it has affected many cities around the world. What we've tasted is just a sample. We haven't seen the worst, and we really need to take it seriously. So I hope that helps stir up the discussion for this morning.
Yeah, so I'm probably gonna date myself because I've been working on climate change since I started working after law school. and my first job was with the DNR. And at the time, we were talking about the Kyoto Protocol. So this is 1997. So even then, with the convention already being in the eyes of our leaders, because the Philippines signed into the United Nations Convention on Climate Change, the issue of climate change was already there. It's just that now we're only started because of the effects. We're feeling it, and you said the science has come together already to sort of undisputedly say that it is happening and it's gonna get worse before it actually gets better if we do get our act together and really work towards not just reducing our emissions as a global community, but also adapting already to the effects that are already there. And I think most of us what we recognize the effects is most of the extreme weather events. Those are the dramatic things that we see. And we always associate it to climate change, like typhoons, drought in certain areas, as you mentioned, lack of water. But I think what's scarier is the impacts that we do not see on a daily basis, what they call slow onset events. And this is what just recently this year, and it's very timely that you're doing this media roundtable, because this week is what they call the Global Week of Climate Action. And we've seen it in the news how students and the youth have come together to mobilize and bring their voices out. But I think one of the things that we have to also look at is not only just looking at the action that can be done, but actually studying what else, because the impacts are going to get worse. And the reports recently, like 2 days ago, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change came out with a special report on oceans and the cryosphere and the changing climate. A country that is archipelagic in nature, most of our coastal communities will be impacted. In fact, they're saying 1 billion people across the world will be impacted just because of the impacts brought about by a changing climate on our oceans and melting glaciers. And for one, the slow onset that we think we have to look into for the Philippines is the effect of sea level rise. And I was having this conversation with Wesley here about, have you seen it in your resort? Have you seen whether in fact your beaches are getting, you're not enjoying as much long beaches as before? Will our ports actually stand the test of time of having increased sea level rise? So I think those are the things, the conversations we also have to do if we're gonna have livable cities, and for a country where most of our cities are now located in coastal areas, and most of our coastal municipalities want to be cities eventually. So how do we push them towards not just sustainability, but also push them to also be, look at measures to make them resilient as well?
For me personally, you've touched on many topics that I want to kind of get a little bit into. I think we can go around and come back. But for me, coastal cities and anything that's close to the water, exactly what you said, I think there's enough studies out there. If you actually are interested, you get into the numbers. People are talking 1.5 degree change, which seems pretty inevitable now. It's not even that we can stop it, it's inevitable. It's looking like we're heading towards 2, 3, and there are reports that clearly identify what happens to rainfall, what happens to life underwater. I mean, just for people, the last one I read, again, I'm no expert, I just went and read it, was a 4 degree change can deplete life underwater by 90%, which means there's no marine life left. And for islands and countries like the Philippines, what does that mean? There are also contrary studies that say that water rise is extremely minimal, which means people are kind of stepping up and saying, okay, this is just too much of a scare, it's not true, right? So I think they all agree about the typhoons, they agree about the shortage of waterfall, but this whole sea level rise, people are talking about it being extremely minimal. So I'd love to talk to you a little bit more about that, and then any more questions about this, I think it's a wide topic that we can come back to.
Good morning, everyone. Well, like Attorney Dia said earlier, climate change is here, and I think this forum is about time to discuss building resilient cities. It's not a question anymore of whether you can control climate change or not. It's about adapting to the effects of climate change. Because it's here, and we're experiencing it now. So we at Hamido, we've been doing a lot of programs, not only to what we call this, minimize the effects of climate change, like we're protecting our surroundings and planting a lot of trees, so, because that's the natural way of controlling carbon emissions. And we're also protecting our mangrove forests. So yeah, the private sector will play a lot of role in the planning for the what they call this, in adapting to climate change. So this public-private partnership programs it's really effective.
Do you think developing countries, it looks like developing countries are not getting into prevention, they're getting into protection, which means they're taking their budgets and they're saying, it looks like our budgets need to go into reinforcing our boundaries and protecting our people and preparing for emergencies, and not as much into conservation anymore?
No, it's you have to take it on a holistic point of view. Not only you have to prepare, adapt to the situation right now, but at the same time you have to have programs in controlling climate change.
So again, for me, right, I think my entire life I've heard about climate change. I think from the time we were kids, this conversation has been on. Of course, the intensity of it has increased. It could also be digital has come in and seeped in, and the voice and the noises are louder. When I have spoken to friends in the industry who are working in this sector, they tell me there's more noise than action. So I think it's getting quoted into everybody's business agendas and everybody's business plans. It's something everybody wants to hear. I think when I buy a home now, if I'm told that it's this % green, it makes me feel responsible in some way too. It says something great. But how much of this is an I quote, and how much of it actually is seeping in to areas that you feel?
Yeah, you're right about that. There are a lot of there's an increase in awareness of the effects of climate change, but the knowledge about climate change is not reaching the common people. When you ask, for example, the common fisherman.
But that's the question, right? Do common people need to know? It's too much. Like when you think about it, like the developed worlds, and that's a whole different conversation, right? About the developed worlds having seen the surge and coming down to a per capita emission level. Ideally, the poor fisherman is not emitting at all. So,
well, the attacking climate change is not only by the government, or it's for everyone. We have to, each and everyone has to contribute. So everybody should know about climate change. Now when you ask, for example, a common fisherman, what do you know about climate change? Sometimes they say it's synonymous to disaster, without knowing why or what you can do about it. They say, oh, there's a strong typhoon. Oh, it's because of climate change, but they don't understand why. So it's really important for them to know also what climate change is all about, what they can do as a common man to address the situation.
So net you would say it's a clear mix between prevention and protection.
Yes.
And that is the way forward
Correct,
for
correct.
especially developing countries and maybe potentially for the Philippines as such.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Amy.
So, good morning, everyone. As mentioned earlier, I do represent Habitat for Humanity. We are a shelter advocate. And when you think about it, when you look at the issue of climate change, although that is not I would not say that that is our primary focus as a nonprofit. Climate change seems to exaggerate or re-highlight a lot of the already pre-existing social ills. For example, we are already in an area of the world which is highly susceptible to all these natural disasters. And climate change has made us even more vulnerable to that. And I don't want to get into a discussion of that would seemingly sound like a chicken and an egg, how difficult it is for a lot of us to have disaster resilient homes where majority of the Filipinos have to rebuild every time that the disaster hits. And that's a common theme. 47% of us, we don't see it. And that's 47% of the most vulnerable of us have gone into practice of a storm hits, their house wasn't disaster resilient in the first place, then they have to rebuild. Oftentimes in the exact same spot. Because they do not have the necessary tools, they don't have the necessary resources, they do not have the necessary know-how to know any better. Okay? When you look at how this exaggeration of what I call social ills or inequalities that has been heightened because of climate change, the Philippines contributes what? How much to global carbon emissions? Less than 1%. Less than 0.5%. And yet, the Philippines, together with Cambodia, Ethiopia, and a lot of other poor countries, are the most susceptible to the effects of climate change. Again, it exaggerates a lot of the things because it's so inevitable. What's 0.5% of global emissions compared to 27% of our neighbors in China, or 14% in the US? And yet these two countries are not even in the top 10 of those who will feel the brunt of climate change. Again, I will open the door, but I won't step into it.
No, but let's step into it. I think it's an important door to step into.
Which countries perhaps would be more equipped to deal with a major disaster in terms of housing? And we in Habitat believe that a safe home, a resilient city, a safe community is at the heart of what we have to address to adapt to the changes in the climate. And if I go back to my first thesis, climate change is inevitable and it is exaggerating and refocusing, highlighting a lot of already pre-existing social conditions.
I think that's really interesting, right? Because if you see the people going on to the streets protesting, and I'm not talking about the kids, I think they understand, and the few of them who have kind of put there and said, your future is at risk, so let's go out. And the countries that are encouraging this, Philippines included, is at least ahead of the curve. But then if you see the adults who are going on the street are generally the ones, they say women are at the forefront of it because for a long time we've been fighting inequality overall. The LGBT community is really strong. So there are large associations that are now saying, all of these inequalities that exist in the world today are getting heightened because of global warming, and the gap kind of just seems to be increasing day by day, and hence all of these people have realized that the years that they have spent fighting for their cause is now going to take a back foot because this is the most important cause to fight for. I think it's great. Let's talk a little bit more when we come back. Maybe a whole round. I think what we've kind of looked at is each of the panelists are an authority in the sector that they're looking at, but at the core of it all, I think there is this conversation that is happening around the world that is heightening each of the pieces. So coming back to water, maybe how do you feel we're preparing for it now? I mean, we know what's happened. We've seen it very recently. Honestly, those few days that there was a water shortage, I saw what happened at office for us. Our water supply came a little delayed. And people were angry. People wanted water to drink, and they were like, why is my water not in office? And nobody has the patience, and no one wants to wait. For them, inconvenience is inconvenience. Did you see fights break out? Did you see the city get a little restless? And how do you think we are preparing? I mean, maybe the Philippines is preparing for this in the coming years.
The inconvenience was real. I was most uh, afraid of what will happen to the hospitals during the first few days. Imagining the thought of a hospital without water with patients. So, fortunately, it was okay, but that was what kept me awake in the first few days, and we're able to cope. But I also saw that side of water is something that people take for granted when it's running strong. But once it's gone, it takes a higher hierarchy than Wi-Fi when it's out, right? So when it's out, they're very angry. And then angry, we saw also during the crisis, this anger was fueled by a lot of trolls, which further heightens the sentiment. But of course, deep inside, the sentiment is genuine. There's inconvenience. Now, when we got it stable around July, people started going back to their own habits. That's why later this month, before I left, there are two issues on water. There's the supply side and there's the demand side. On the supply side, there is a roadmap of what needs to be done, but there are delays in the execution of the roadmap. Even projects like this Kaliwa Dam, which has already been approved by the government, is still encountering delays. There's always opposition to a big water project because there will be interests that will be connected. So there is a roadmap, but execution on this roadmap is going to be challenging. So what needs to be done is really to get the facts right and to pull stakeholders together and to educate the users that we need to make certain choices. If you want water from Manila Bay, that is possible, but it's expensive because desalination is expensive. If you want water from Laguna Lake, that's also possible. If you want cleaner water from Sierra Madre, that's also possible. But certain villages will have to be inundated. You will have to traverse a long way. You know? So it's up to us to make hard choices for us to be resilient. There are no easy choices at this point, is the point I'm making. But for us to make that, we need to have a constructive dialogue of sorts like this and weed out the misinformation. What slows down a lot of execution is a lot of misinformation being floated. And when projects like infra, like water, are delayed, the biggest victims are us, the normal users. And then those who were blocking it before will just find another issue to block, right? So there is a plan. The plan is not will be challenging to execute. So that's on the supply side. On the demand side, there's going to be a campaign I initiated before I stepped down to gather a multi-sectoral view for demand management, responsible use of water. Even during the crisis, if you go to certain areas, the gardens are still very green. They still water the plants twice a day. They still clean the cars using hoses. So there's going to be a campaign to be launched, to be led by MMDA and the local mayors. We're going to use the local mayor's social media to encourage people for responsible use of water. When the rains fell, everyone sent a message to me, oh, now Angat is full. But it was just a 30-minute rainfall. No? It takes a lot of rainfall to fill up Angat, and we are still not to the right level. So people forget easily once they have water and then forget, and then suddenly flare up when it's gone. But water infra takes time to build, but for us to build it on time, we need to make hard choices as a group of stakeholders. And for us to make the right choice, we need the facts on the table. And we need to make an extra effort to weed out the misinformation. That's the only way. we need to prepare for the next summer because there will still be no new dam. We will still depend on Angat. We will still pray that the rains hit Angat, and then we'll see what happens next summer. But we have to start making the right steps.
When you say we, do you mean the people or?
I think everyone is involved because everyone is affected. That's why I encourage people to still prepare their contingency plans, additional storage or other sources for next summer. Because you'll never know how long, whether there will be a new El Nino, because you're taking a chance that number one, there will be rain. Number two, that the rains will hit Angat. We were so disappointed that the first few rains never entered the Philippine area of responsibility. They were always out. Those who entered missed Angat. Only recently has it been filled up, but so it's like rolling the dice. So it's a pretty precarious situation. Luckily, it's moving up, but there's no guarantee. So we have to address both the supply side and the demand side. Again, education, the small things, rainwater harvesting is an interesting concept that needs to have scale and have a deliberate effort. There are many ideas, but getting them to scale or getting them on time is the challenge for everyone.
I mean, for me personally, I'm going to say something that is personal. This is not a public opinion at all. So, I'm Indian. My parents live in a city called Bangalore, in India. Very developed city, is the IT capital of India. Extremely overpopulated. We're going upwards of 20 million. It's a landlocked city. Our water tables have dried out. Right? We're completely industrialized. There's so many corporates that sit out of Bangalore, and our water tables are dry. My parents live there for the last 3.5 years. They have the financial means to buy water, so they buy water, and they still use it extremely irresponsibly. Like when I go home and I see my parents use water, it shocks me because I know they pay more than anyone else, but they're completely okay with it. It's still not pinching them somewhere. It comes down to water pricing, right? In a country like India that I know of, water is extremely cheap. It's extremely subsidized because we're a poor country overall, and variable pricing is very difficult. In Manila, there is a sort of variable pricing in place. I think that is 2 steps ahead for a lot of other countries in the region. But it still doesn't seem like it's enough, right? I mean, I think you can tell people 100 times, use less water. But if it doesn't fit you personally, why would you make it inconvenient for yourself? I think at an inherent level, all of us are we will first make ourselves comfortable and then everything else. So whose responsibility is it? I mean, I think education is very important, but there has to be a control somewhere, taking into account that humans are selfish and, they're not going to make the cut at a very large level. So who makes this?
A key responsible unit will be the regulator. In other countries, what they've done quite successfully during periods of water shortage is to actually adjust the price of water, double or triple during hot summer months, basically to curtail the usage. Because to address behavior, if it pinches their bill, they'll be more responsible. There are many, many examples. When, depending on the level of crisis, then they adjust the tariff rates. And so that's a question in a policy only a regulator with a lot of education can push. We've ceded that idea to the regulator, but this is one of the decisions that we together should make, because we know that it's also easy, especially to sensationalize 1.01% water rate increase in our situation is always sensationalized, right? But if we are to be serious in terms of managing the resource, one successful lever proven worldwide is to adjust the tariff when the supply is very low, both at the industrial and at the residential level. And the regulator is key to tell, because he will be unpopular. There will always be someone to oppose that, even before he finishes the sentence. So it's just the way it is. So you need a brave soul to tell. It cannot be the concessionaires because they will be accused of being self-serving. But someone in authority has to speak that we need to do this to conserve the limited resources. And there are many, many good examples.
Sounds great.
Yeah.
In like a closing before I open it up for questions. Okay, great. Yeah, we have one already. A few.
Hello, Christine from Philippine News Agency. On the issue of water shortage, Sir First, Patrick, you recently said that the shortage was actually due to mismanagement and not due to climate change or kulang yung tubig. It was caused by panic storing with some households. So, say, yung water na supposedly for a week, it was all consumed sa isang araw lang. And you also mentioned that in some countries, they have created a solution on this where they would increase the pricing of water. Have you done that before or suggested for it to happen since it's effective? And it would be effective since if the people would pay higher, they would be more conscious usage of water.
I think before I left Manila Water in August, the idea with the new administrator of using tariff as one potential lever has been raised with General Salamat. With Patrick has also been raised, but it's not thoroughly discussed. But what's interesting is that they're also looking for different ways to control the demand side. Kasi there's an issue on the supply side. The supply solutions will come many years from now. But everyone could start doing something on the demand side. So that's the easier one to address now, because the water infra will come later on.
Sir, it was only discussed. What were the negative side on it? What was it pushed through?
No, it was not a big forum like this or a workshop. It was more of a, so if supply is going to be limited, what else can we do? So we offered the experiences of other countries, Australia, California, South Africa, Cape Town. I think day zero of Cape Town is a very interesting visual of what it could be, and it's something that could be propagated a bit more. So it was more in that context. It was very casual, informal, rather than a very informal discussion.
Hello. I have another question about water. Do you think that Kaliwa Dam is the best choice other than Manila Bay or Laguna Lake as another source of water?
I think there are the need for water will continue, and Kaliwa Dam has already been approved. Why was it approved? Because it's clean and it's economic. I think the challenge for Kaliwa Dam on the execution side is how do we execute properly? If there will be indigenous people that will be affected, for example, how do we deal with that responsibly? If there will be communities that will have to be inundated, how do we deal with those communities responsibly? So that's on the execution side. On the economic side, and then it's been there for many years. Matagal na siya. On a range of about 8 choices, I think it ranks very high. And it's something that we urgently need. Manila Bay, there are technologies that could treat Manila Bay or Laguna Lake. Both Manila Water and Maynila would use Laguna Lake. the challenge with Laguna Lake is the raw water quality is very unstable. No? And therefore, you would have to design a plant for the worst case scenario. No? So therefore, it's an issue of cost. No? So it would have to be a combination of solutions, and then in the end, the regulator will have to decide whether this combination of solutions and then projecting that into water rate increases over time would be reasonable. So that's the balancing act. No? It's not one or the other. So it's an issue of cost and an issue also of making sure that there will be supply. But it's not just an issue of cost, because the most expensive water is no water. No? So even even at that point, that's why there are many technical working groups right now to make sure that you're not only looking at cost but availability of water. So that's it's not a choice between Manila Bay or Kaliwa.
A follow-up question, Mr. De La Cruz, Joel Aksaman of Manila Standard. Follow-up question, what the lady did bring up about. It's quite apparent that Kaliwa Dam is the solution in terms of million liters per day that Metro Manila and its environs do. I think the controversy, well, what the media has been reporting is the controversy is the nature of the solution, which seems to have been borrowed from major business templates all over the world of a huge dam inundating ancestral lands, and that's why there's big opposition with the communities there and the indigenous people. Plus the controversial nature of the business partnership of China and the MWSS and the current administration, truth or not. So, is there not another business template or technology which will not impact as much, and I think our panelists will be interested in this, the surrounding communities there in Quezon, the indigenous people, a technological and business template solution which would not damage as much the environment there and the rights of the people there, but at the same time deliver the same amount of billion liters per day, which is yung pangangailangan talaga ng Metro Manila. We don't really need 1,500 million liters per day. As I understand, it's really a certain amount which would just mapupunan lang yung binibigay ng Angat and Laguna de Bay. Forget Manila Bay because that's science fiction. I mean, it can happen, but the cost per liter per is highly prohibitive. Hindi naman tayo Saudi Arabia, Middle East. So it's Kaliwa Dam. Is there another technology or business template na medyo mukhang either the government deliberately and the private sector actually could have been guilty of glossing over in favor of this huge cast of thousands, multi-million-dollar project like what the Chinese are proposing, which we could explore further and na medyo na-miss lang and would not damage as much the environment and the rights of the indigenous people over there. It's a bit of a long question. Then, pardon me, I have to take your answer. Okay. Senior citizen, kailangan medyo dapat kaya answer.
No, I don't want to comment too much on an MWSS project because I'm not part of.
But you mentioned Kaliwa, so
yeah. So, but the question is, are there other available sources? There are, of course, other available sources, and that's part of the plan. There is a move by the private sector to declare Laguna Lake primarily as a water source. We're pushing for that.
Mr. De La Cruz, sorry, the yield from Laguna de Bay would never be enough.
It is possible.
It's a marketing thing, really.
It is possible that there's a lot of water in Laguna Lake. The issue of Laguna Lake is cost. It's really just cost. No? Laguna Lake is more expensive to choose. No? So your question kasi is, are there other available sources? There are. Laguna Lake is one. Manila Water is pushing for 250 MLD, which is quite sizable, in the eastern part of East Bay of Laguna Lake. And there could be more. No? There's another 50 to about 300 MLD near Pinangonan area. So that's already 600 MLD just on the Manila water side. So you have to time it, and then you have to balance that with the cost. So that's what the regulator has to balance. No? But the basic answer to your question is there are available water sources for Metro Manila to use. It's up to us whether we are prepared to pay higher to have water. No? So the answer to that question is obvious to some, but not obvious to some other people. No? But just go outside, there's Laguna Lake for us to tap. There is technology to treat it, it's available. There is technology to treat Manila Bay. No? So it's an issue of cost. And again, as I mentioned earlier, we all have to make our minds on what tough choices we are willing to make to have water.
Hi, good morning. My name is Raf. I work in construction and tourism, so I'm very familiar with how I guess it can be a double-edged sword for development. I guess what I'm curious about is, I'll give you a short story, small context. I work in La Union, and we don't have a day zero in La Union, but every summer, water runs out along that San Juan coastline. Right? And every summer it gets earlier and earlier. So there's a day zero for no water summer, and it costs a lot. I've spoken to several architects, and one of them had a very interesting comment, that part of the challenge is that as we build these countryside municipalities that are aspiring cities, two things happen. One is you lose a lot of your tree cover that allows the water to come down, and second is you cement a lot of things so that the permeability of the soil is no longer there, so water doesn't trickle back into the tap, into the aquifer. So is there a way that, like, I guess, like more information, or are there more solutions like this, or perhaps you guys, the four of you, could push these simple solutions? Because Manila is a different animal, I understand, but there's so many other communities that could benefit from these small incremental change. Imagine if all the resorts in one area decided, okay, we're gonna have permeable sections of our property so that water comes in.
We have architect as well. If you want to question in that direction.
Please.
Would you like?
Anyway, yeah, very interesting discussion. That's one way. More permeable surfaces, so that we try to be aquifer, and then more trees. Very basic. In fact, a lot of the problem with resiliency and sustainability is forgetting the basics.
But sir, is there a law that requires permeability and, let's say, 3-layer in, let's say, a town? Like, for example, is there, like, it has to be 30% covered in trees, or 20% of your area has to be permeable? I'm curious.
There is now in the green building code a certain percentage where you're required to avoid the solid asphalt and concrete pavements, so that precisely you charge to recharge the aquifer. That's a very good way to do it. Of course, nothing like ground cover, like trees, vegetation. That's very important, especially out there. Here in Manila, there's no place to put all those vegetation. That's why you should be able to preserve that in resorts outside the city.
We at Hamilo Coast is in Nasugbu, Batangas. Our main source of water there is Rizal, and Birch is correct. It's an expensive process, but yeah, we're not using the water source of the community around us. So we're using desalination. It's expensive, but we go along with it. And one of our ways to conserve water is to use our wastewater for irrigation. We have a big landscape there in Iloilo, and we use our treated wastewater for irrigation.
I think with regard to your question, there are things that we call, well, for WWF, we call them, and a lot of our organizations call them nature-based solutions. Some of them are really very basic, and you use the way nature actually evolves to be able to provide, because that's how things have actually evolved before. So using, growing your mangrove cover, if you're in a coastal area, using some of those more permeable material so that you can increase the capture of water. These are nature-based solutions which have to be included and be consciously inputted in a lot of our development. We talk about sustainability, and sustainability really is not just sustainable for now. And that's what we should think about. It's really a balance of what you have now, but what that balance can be for the future. So that, as they say, generations can still live comfortably the way we are now, if not even better. So I think those solutions should be not just the man-made ones, which we've been talking about infrastructure, which we have had those clear-cut, difficult discussions and decisions even before, but also including those nature-based solutions. Because as it is, nature has provided so much for us before. And we need to also bring that back, because we've been encroaching so much already. And for us in WWF, we believe that man and nature can thrive together if only we find the ways by which we can make that balance. And I think that's where sustainability comes into the picture. And when you talk about sustainability, it's not just about, what is it for my business, what is it for my organization, but what is it for me as I live as an individual, and how do I bring that forward to influence other people? I mean, we're an NGO, we try to make conscious decisions, not just an NGO, but individually. I mean, it's not just like, preaching, but also walking the talk, and it's very difficult. Even for me, I can't totally say I'm a full environmentalist, because I still drive a car in this traffic in Metro Manila. There are days that's unavoidable that I have to use plastic, although I try to avoid single-use plastic. So it's really going down to the, individual level. Because earlier, JB was saying, we have less than 5% of global emissions. But if that 5% still continues to do the business as usual, we still contribute to the problem, right? And so I think, unfortunately, it's come to the point wherein we all have to do something. We cannot wait for the bigger countries to do something. So we have to do our bit while pushing them to do more. I think it comes to that point already, and unfortunately, we've been hammering about this for more than 20, 30 years, and the science has come already full circle, so to speak, to tell us and hit us in the butt and say, hey, you should have done this yesterday. So I think it's really, when you talk about sustainability, it's really doing our own individual bits, but also ensuring that in the bigger scale, governments, leaders, business decision makers actually think about what can you do to strike that balance of both, reducing your carbon footprint, but still making a very good impact on the lives of people and the lives of our country. So I think that's something, and those nature-based solutions actually help a lot. I mean, it's bringing it back to what it used to be, and I think it's something that we also have to think about here in designing and developing.
Jamie, can I ask you the hard question before you ask? Maybe I'll push
Okay.
the hard question for you, and you can please kind of wrap this up with that. I think what's being said right now, I'm a realist, I'm not an optimist. And I think that's the way the world should be at this point. I think all of us are using hope as our, tool of everything will be fine. It's all okay. Somebody will find the solution somewhere. They always do. So let's have a realistic discussion about this, right? I personally, again, this is my opinion. I think when you leave this decision to an individual, we're going to go nowhere, right? It takes too long to have the self-reliance. I gave up single-use, I gave up straws maybe 6 years ago, but that was my contribution. And it's taken a long time to come and say, okay, I'm a little better. But true, I use Grab all the time. I'm everywhere. I fly around the world with absolutely no regret. So, how does it come down? Like, what is the real way forward?
I think, don't get me wrong, I'm all for all these little things that we can do to help lessen the impact of the uninevitable effects of climate change. But I think now we have to shift as a country most susceptible to the effects of climate change. It should be that, coupled with what can we do to survive the change. It cannot just be that. It should be that plus what are we going to do so we survive? It's reached us that point. As I said earlier, we are already naturally susceptible to weather disturbances. Very, very serious. One of the most susceptible in the world. Add climate change into the picture, and maybe not just 47% of us will be vulnerable to this. It could very well be literally at your doorstep in the next big typhoon. So one concrete thing, and we've brought in the private sector into this, the government into this, is to start making one of our provinces, Negros Occidental, to have 10,000 disaster-resilient homes until 2024. That's 10,000 homes in 2024. We're not going to use conventional building techniques. We're going to use, just to borrow what attorney said, a nature-based solution. We're going to be using bamboo. And we've coupled this with cement frame technology. So we've brought in this solution because bamboo compared to regular lumber grows at a much faster scale. Bamboo is a grass. But the strength of a bamboo is, as architect would agree, is comparable, perhaps even better than what your traditional houses could have. Can be used as a rebar. If you looked at Hong Kong in the 90s, none of those buildings would have been built without bamboo because they were so strong, sturdy. You can, there's a certain engineering that you can use it to grow into heights. You construct it to reach great heights, and they were used as scaffolding of even the HSBC building in Hong Kong. And again, going back to our roots, we have a long history of building with bamboo. To borrow a few words, nature has already provided a lot for us. So it's a question of bringing that in, updating it with a creative solution, maybe for water or whatever, and then making that work given what's happening now. So again, I'm all for all these little things that we can do, and we're not contributing 5%, 0.5% only to the global emission, but that and what can we do to survive. So again, being realistic with where we are.
So, if this was used in the past, and bamboo does seem like a cost-efficient solution, please correct me if I'm wrong. For me, it sounds like a cost-efficient solution. Why is it taking so long for an uptake in adoption?
I guess it's really a question of not just communication or information, but communication that fuels behavioral change. So we need communication that will actually change the way that we behave. And it is a long shot. It takes a lot of deliberate effort. It takes a lot of investment to change a certain mindset. Even if you go to areas outside of Metro Manila, those who have no homes, if you come to them and say, okay, come, we'll help you have a home, it's gonna be used, we're gonna use bamboo, we're gonna reinforce it with cement, they're going to say, bamboo house, bahay na mahirap. Bamboo house, isn't that a home for the poor? It is not my first choice. I want concrete house. So you really have to take the time to talk and educate and wait for that behavior to change. And unfortunately, I think that's a step that we must take, although long. Two ways where you can affect sustainable change. Either it's forced upon you and eventually you buy into it, or you start from the grassroots and start really educating them.
And now that we're in the situation that you highlighted, where if you had to be given the choice to make a decision, which one would you go? The top down or bottom up?
Maybe I do both. I do both. I'm sorry, I can't. I would really do both.
Diplomatic.
I would really do both, only because I think that is the most effective way. Definitely, we need to have that legislature in place so that people will be will be pushed towards taking the lead.
Yes. Maybe I'd just like to add, she mentioned legislature. I mean, we do have laws already, and the challenge is really implementing them well. But just maybe for the next panel to think about, it's really looking at, cities they have so much leeway. I mean, the national government is there to provide big policy landscape, but cities have so much in their power and mandate to be able to mold how they want their development to be. And that's where in the intersection of where the construction and development with cities, and if the leaders of our cities can be able to think well about how sustainability can be done. I mean, for us, we talked about water, we not talked about energy, for which we do a lot of it, and a lot of our energy is actually fueled by fossil fuel here in this country. But we're beginning to talk to a local government in a city in Mindanao to actually think about the planning for their power development, because they take it for granted that the national government is just going to provide them power. All of our cities plan for how they will develop. They always have so many plans that they have to, they have the city development plan, city investment plan, but they never really think about how much electricity is needed or power is needed to power the development I want. They've never been engaged in that process because they've always had the national government to plan for the energy. So we're trying to get them to think about, okay, you want to grow. Of course, our ulterior motive is that they use more of the renewable energy sources that are around them. But get them to also engage in the planning process so that they have a say. And I think that's where I come back to the cities and their leaders have so much to say about how sustainable they can be. And I think the discussion we're having here about the use of bamboo, if the national government doesn't use it, I mean, get the city itself, the leaders to use it. And then they become an example. And alam niyo naman here in the Philippines, if one city does it well, the other cities try to copy, right?
Yeah.
So if you're able to provide that example of sustainability in a solution that others are seeing can be used in them, then I think that's another way to go. You're saying we do it top down, bottom up. I think you use the cities themselves, the power that the city can do to be able to develop well, and as a way forward to be able to find the solutions we need to make them resilient.
Hi, good morning. LA from eLifestyle Manila. I think I also noticed one of the biggest contributor in traffic is the road construction due to water drainages being repaired. I remembered a few years ago there was a movement to change the cement pipes to plastic pipes by a manufacturer that says their pipes last 50 years while cement it's only 3 to 5 years. And it's funny because we noticed it's always a digging every 6 months before election. So just kidding aside. So are there things that we can do to change that shift? Because in the previous reports we also read that one of the major factors of very valuable or very expensive water is because of leaks and pilferages. Number two, also on the sustainable cities, I also noticed there are a group of divers who clean the ocean every Sunday, and they find reports of these hotels and resorts having plastic bottles and shampoo stuff all under the sea. are there things that we can do, to really stop this because it's really polluting our environment. I commend on WWF's move to help green the environment by convincing some of the restaurants and one pizza manufacturing to eliminate plastic by 2020. And lastly, on sustainable cities, is there a way that we can help? Like there was an article that I wrote before in a magazine that they had floating, what they call these floating garages, wherein they can help, save your furniture or whatever during a typhoon or something. Maybe we can do that. Also, like in Balising, they have a reservoir for water that they recycle the rainwater, and they use it for cleaning. I don't know if they also use it for drinking or something. But do we have a move like Singapore to use salt water as drinking water?
Yes.
Actually, if I can answer that question, my name is Alexis. I work with Wesley Hamilo Coast. We'd like to see Hamilo Coast as a microcosm of what could be done. We're talking about being realist and about a few comments that the panel have made. We work a lot with WWF, as Attorney here would agree, and what we like to practice in Hamilo, we hope to impart. You mentioned your very first question, how do you implement it on the individual level? At Hamilo, our programs, as far as, for example, our hotel already uses glass pitchers instead of single-use plastics. In the condominiums, we require the residents to segregate their trash, segregate their trash before we collect it. So these are top-down approach, basically top-down approach on implementing the policies we want to see as far as sustainability is concerned. Because let's face it, I think that's the easiest or only way that we will see individuals actually follow the rules is if you put a system of checks, balances, and penalties to the entire system. So, again, the microcosm of what could be done. They come into Hamilo, they come into Pico de Loroco. We implement these policies and they follow because there's no choice. We won't collect your trash if you don't segregate. You have no choice but to use the glass pitchers instead of single-use plastics. Our developments do use solar panels also. So these are the little things that hopefully when they leave the resort, they carry with them to their homes, and and hopefully that's a way to start, right?
Can I also add, just before I pass the mic, 2 years ago there was also a movement to save the ice caps in Alaska because it was already melting and there was a big river inside the ice caps. Yesterday I actually read an article that the island already melted. As in there's no more ice cap, like this is big island. So I think it's really alarming that we really need to do something.
We're definitely run out of time, so we'll take 2 more questions. And it is an important conversation, and I think if we had an option, we'd open it up. But the panelists have very generously decided to stay back a little bit longer and have a conversation with you one-on-one. But we would like to move on to the next panel. So 2 more questions and then we move. Yeah? Thank you.
Thank you. Alan Visitacion from Raha Broadcasting Network. With the onslaught of climate change, the hardest to be hit always has been the marginalized and the economically challenged. In building a resilient shelter and the community as well, considering also in looking into the Santos Sugay thesis, how would the cost of this resilient shelter be and how much would it be? And what are the adjoining agencies that would help build a person who is part of marginalized and economically challenged person to build such a resilient home as well? Ms. Sugay?
Actually, I guess that's one of the misconceptions, that if you do build in a more responsible way with technology that's not conventional, it might cost more. But there are a lot of really, really smart people who've made this technology accessible. So if you'd like, let's say, a bamboo cement house within the socialized socialized housing mark, it could still fall under 530,000, which is well within the government's threshold for socialized housing. In terms of partnerships, like I mentioned earlier, we are committed to building the 10,000 homes using this technology in Negros Occidental. It's not enough that we will now build disaster resilient bamboo homes one at a time. We want to attack the problem one province at a time. So we really need the partnerships of the local government. We've recently signed a covenant with the provincial government of Negros, together with a lot of foundations, Ayala Foundation, Ayala Land, Benetera, a lot of local nonprofits, because they know their community best. We will not come in with an intervention without fully talking with the people who will be most affected. So no development will happen without the buy-in of the people. And so far, this has been quite successful, because we formed this coalition of 12 organizations committed to solving the housing problem with disaster resilient and environmentally friendly homes.
Yes, hello. Good morning. Ross Galosar from